A few years ago when I was 19, I was coming home from watching the fireworks display on New Year's Eve. It was 3 a.m. when I reached my safe, family-friendly, nothing ever happened neighbourhood. I'm from Sydney, Australia, and live in a posher and wealthier area. My friends wanted to call a taxi, because we didn't want to wake our poor parents at this hour to drive us home. Because of my stubbornness and insistence, we ended up taking the very long walk home. My friend Aidan was complaining most of the time. Guess you can't blame him. Rowan was just silent and compliant. I was cheerful. When we reached almost my street, we split ways. The guys continued on their very long walk home, much longer than mine, and I continued on to mine. When I passed a little cake shop, I noticed a guy across the street. I only looked at him briefly, but something in the way he quickly looked up at me almost in interest caught my attention. I hurried on anyway, because I'm usually paranoid about things, and 99% of the time it's just me being paranoid. I turned onto my street, which was much darker than I'd anticipated. This was around 3:15 a.m. mind you, and as I passed the bowling club and the oval, I kept looking behind me just to make sure. It was getting quite cold and dark, so I started feeling creeped out, but there was no one behind me. No one anywhere I could see anyway. I was halfway down my street, where the road dips down, when I noticed something on the path in front of me. I couldn't tell what it was, and at the last minute I stepped off the path onto the road to avoid it, because it looked like it might be a dead animal. And as I stepped onto the road, I turned slightly and saw that there was someone behind me. They weren't too close, but they weren't too far away either, and I remember my heart leapt into my throat because I hadn't seen them before. And for them to have gotten that close in such a short space of time, well, it didn't sit well with me. When I told people about this later, they said that I should have been quite sus. It's 3 a.m. in the morning, and you're quietly walking behind a girl, not even bothering to keep a safe distance? Like if you're really innocent, you'd take measures to emphasize that, right? I couldn't see who it was, whether it would be male or female, because it was just a black figure to me. It was a very brief glimpse. I was scared though, so I whipped out my phone and started to call Aidan. I kept calling him, but silly Vodafone wouldn't connect me to him. So I tried calling Rowan, but he wouldn't pick up either. I kept this up at least 5 times, getting increasingly anxious, but not daring to look behind me to see if he was still there. I'm glad I didn't actually. I think I would have really freaked out if I confirmed it. By that time I'd just reached my driveway, and I hurried up it, thinking I would be safe. But, as I was halfway up, I looked over my shoulder again just really quickly, and I saw the figure again. The way I explain this next bit is really confused and muddling, because on the one hand, it may have just looked like he was merely passing my driveway, but on the other, I'm much more certain that it looked like he was about to step onto it. At that precise moment though, it occurred to me that he might be my older brother Jonathan, because no one else would bother walking up my driveway, even if this guy was following me. It never occurred to me that they would really go to all the lengths of going up my driveway as well. I thought it would be completely safe, because I had the advantage of having my house close when he started following me. However, something about the build of the figure didn't really seem like Jonathan to me, so I hurried on in anyway. My beautiful, wonderful, amazing mother had stayed up to wait for me, and I'm so grateful, because she opened the door as soon as I knocked. I hate to imagine what would have happened if I had to have waited for a while. I went inside, but I left the second door open and the outside light on because I thought Jonathan might be coming in any second now. But my mum was like, "You can turn them off, he came back 2 hours ago." I did get a little creeped out by then, but I just dismissed the thought, because we are all so quick to think that we are always so safe. I closed the door, shut off the light, and went to grab a drink of water. My mum went to bed, and I went to my room to grab my clothes, and then went into the bathroom to take a shower, and I switched off the living room lights. This is sort of funny now to think about it. Before I took the shower, I replied back to a message from Aidan, who was asking if I was home safe. I demanded to know why they hadn't picked up the phone, and then told him that I was creeped out for a few minutes, but it was okay. Then I showered. I actually thought about the figure. I wasn't too convinced that it was following me, but my mind did teeter into wondering this or that. In any case, I remember thinking that it was okay because I was safe now. Then, near the end of my shower, I heard something at the window. It didn't sound like the usual creaking or bumping of an old house. The way I described it to other people was like the sound of someone resting their hands against the window to steady themselves. It sounded really unnatural, I know, because it caught my attention straight away, and I immediately jumped to the possibility that there might be someone outside. And I know that only a really strange sound could make me do what I did next, which was turn off the water and crouch under the window, hiding and waiting. I waited for some time, too scared to move for a few minutes, but there was nothing. So I gingerly crawled out, still too scared to stand up properly, and I switched off the bathroom lights. But then, it was impossible for me to dry myself and dress myself. So I turned on the heater light, which is much smaller and dimmer, but as I did that, I noticed at the window there were very small blue lights. That certainly didn't belong there. The only way I can describe it, it was almost like the keypad of a phone was lit up. I was so scared, but I switched off the heater light as well and backed into a corner, my towel wrapped around me, and I waited. It seemed like a long time that I waited. I was too scared to unlock the door and move because I knew it would make a lot of noise. And as I waited in the pitch darkness, several blue lights came on outside the window. It became very bright, and they were moving it, trying to shine it through the window. Now that I think about it, was it a phone? I'm not sure. But that did it. I practically bolted for my mum. I unlocked the door and went into my parents' room, trembling like a leaf, and gibbering that there was someone outside the bathroom window. I was very clearly upset. My mum ushered me around, trying to find a safe room for me to change into. My dad apparently heard the footsteps hurrying back down the driveway, and I'm glad he did, because the situation feels so unreal to me. I'm not even sure if it really happened. Maybe I imagined it, but this is all confirmation that it was not my imagination. I was so shaky. I slid into bed and couldn't sleep the whole night until morning. And even when it was morning, I was terrified, especially when I heard Dad leave the house and go into the backyard. So that's my lesson learned. I'm never walking home at night again. I'm even a bit worried during the day. We never did find out who it was. People wonder if it was the same person I'd passed earlier, but I don't think so. My brother doesn't think so either. He says that it may have been someone lurking at the oval, who came out of a little hole as I walked past the supposed dead animal on the path, because of how suddenly he appeared behind me. Please don't go walking home alone at night, girls. It only takes one moment for you to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, and it can go very wrong indeed. My buddy Todd and I were camping at a small state lake in Kansas. The park is surrounded by farmland, with about a mile-long gravel road leading up to it, which then goes into the woods and descends to the lake. As anyone who is familiar with gravel roads can attest, it's easy to hear someone coming. The campsite we were staying at was in the hills above the lake and wasn't frequently used. but unfortunately is closed now. We are both light sleepers and would wake up to a moose rustling the leaves near our tent. That night, we were up until sometime after 1 a.m, talking about the old days next to the fire, and we were asleep at around 1:30. We don't like to drink in the woods because it dulls our senses, and we slept somewhere restlessly and woke up to every tiny sound that night. Every sound, except one that would explain why there was a large bottle of baby oil squarely in front of our tent door in the morning. We both looked at each other in shock and packed up our shit to leave, in case it was a threat of something to come that night. This second story also happened with Todd, but it was at a different campground. We used to like to renegade camp, which is a term we made up about camping places that we weren't supposed to be in. We'd choose a park that had a good chunk of woods and closed at sundown, park our cars in a nearby neighborhood, and walk in before the park closed. We'd set up camp, and after the park was closed, we'd have a little fire in our low-key camp. Very good times. On one of our renegade camping trips, we were staying at the far side of a lake that was very rural. We had some friends drop us off during the day, and we walked deep into the woods near the lake. On this side of the lake there was no camping allowed, and we hadn't seen anyone else at it. We didn't camp near the water because we didn't want to be seen. The woods were packed with locust trees, with those giant medieval torture thorns, and strung between those trees were ropes like spider webs, with huge face huggers. It made for some pretty uncomfortable progress through ravines. By the time we set up camp, we were pretty jittery from the hike, and a little bloody from all the thorns. When we finally made it to bed that night, we still had the creepy crawlies, and felt like there were spiders on us constantly, so it took us a while to get back to sleep. At around 3 a.m, I was awoken by a hard, flat slap right across the middle of my bare chest. I woke up shouting, "What the hell?" And Todd was screaming, "Spiders! Spiders are everywhere, they're all over us!" And he started frantically trying to get out of the tent, whilst wildly swinging around to get the spiders off. He was brushing his body like they were all over him, and taking wild swings at his sleeping bag and mine. I was freaking out and flailing at everything, trying to get a flashlight to see what the hell was going on. He managed to get the tent door unzipped, and had taken 2 steps in his tidy whities, and I started yelling, "Todd, you're gonna run into the thorns!" And then he stopped and turned around and slowly said, "Mike, why am I outside the tent? Like, what the hell? You said there were spiders, I thought." And he replied in a very calm voice, "They're gone now," and turned and slowly started getting back into the tent. I'm panting like I'd run a marathon, and high as hell on adrenaline, as he calmly gets back in his sleeping bag. I shook him and said, "What the hell? What was that?" He acted like he'd just woken up. Turns out, I was missing one crucial piece of information. My friend Todd was taking a new medication, and that had the potential side effect of night terrors. After a few minutes of speaking about what had just happened, I calmed down a little, and then, off in the woods behind us, we hear, "Todd! Where are you going, Todd? You're going to run into the thorns, Todd!" There was dead silence. We couldn't even breathe. We whispered to each other, "What the hell was that?" Then we heard the same voice from behind us at a different angle. It travelled several hundred yards left in a couple of seconds. Todd! I'm trying to find you, Todd! Where are you? Holy shit! What the hell are we gonna do? We can't run into the woods, we'll get destroyed in the thorns! We can't hide from something that can move like that. The voice didn't echo. It was just kind of out there. It sounded like it was 50 yards off still. There was no sound at all. Nothing was moving. Then, Todd almost gave me a heart attack by yelling out into the night, "I'm fine. Go back to bed." And I slapped the shit out of him. We never got a response. We turned on every light we had, built the fire up, until it was about 6 feet high, and waited with wide eyes and pocket knives drawn for the morning to come. I've never been back to that park since. New Year's 2009, going into 2010. I went to visit a friend who was attending university in a nearby city. The house she lived in happened to be a street away from the house I was born in, and spent the first 7 years of my life in, so I knew the area reasonably well. There were 4 of us girls, but only myself and the girl who was going uni knew the area. Basically, her house was at the edge of a walled park, which was locked overnight dusk till dawn. On the other side of the park was the main body of the city, including the uni itself, and the majority of the pubs and clubs and drinking places. To get from one to the other, you'd have to go around the park, which for the most part is reasonably well lit. We'd spent the night out over New Year's and we'd all gotten pretty drunk. The token lightweights were smashed. The normally sensible ones of the 3 of us were hiccuping and falling over the place, and saying she loved all of us. The uni girl was the usually messy drunk, but she seemed to be holding herself together, though she and I were also stumbling and noticeably drunk anyway. We took the route over the top of the park, because it was marginally quicker. As we walked along, we passed the opening of a back alley, where we saw a man just standing in the middle of the lane about 30 yards away. He wasn't on his phone, he wasn't with anyone. He was just stood stock still and dressed in dark, nondescript clothes, directly in the middle of the empty alleyway just facing us. Uni girl and I clocked eyes, and both of us knew something was up with this picture. Sensible girl drunkenly decided it would be a great time to yell Happy New Year at the top of her lungs and enthusiastically wave at him. Uni girl and I dragged her away from the alleyway and quickly marched both of them onwards. The uni girl asked me if he was following us, and my heart stopped as I turned my head and saw he'd left the alleyway. We sped up. Now uni girl and I realized the predicament easily. We were closer to the front entrance to her house. It was terraced, so a huge row of connected houses. But that could mean that the man, who was casually walking behind us, but definitely gaining, would almost certainly know where we were staying, and which house my friend lived in. We decided to take the risk to go around the back, and luckily lost him before we got to the alleyway entrance, so he wasn't 100% on where we'd gone, or into which house we'd go into. Uni and I got the sensible girl and the lightweight settled down, and began sneaking looks out the front window curtains, only to see him walking up and down the road on the other side, quite obviously peering into windows and looking at lights that were on in the houses. Our skin crawled, so we phoned the non-emergency police number and told them what happened. They sent a car around the block, and we saw the dude quickly disappear after that. The next morning, we told the other 2 what happened. They had no clue the danger that we'd been in. We had the TV on in the background and the local news came on. A girl had been separated from her friend whilst drunk the night before, and had been attacked and raped in the same road we saw the man in the first place. Collectively, We were shaken by what could have been. The second part occurred when I happened to move back to the area in 2014. By then I'd totally forgotten about this episode, so I was trying to settle into my job, which had brought me back to the area. I was again on the other side of the park, this time at the bottom, and my new house was a few roads back from where the uni girls had been. So I basically would walk this same road every day to and from work, through the park during the daytime, and along the lower wall of the park at night. I would work late on some days, with my hour rota until 11 PM, but often I wouldn't leave to walk home until 12, 1 or even 2. It was a shit job. They kept putting me in on Friday and Saturday nights, which I didn't mind at all, but then 2 Saturdays in a row, I felt like I was being followed by someone. Though both times I was able to go into a shop to lose them, or to get a friend who lived on their way to come outside their house and chat with me, until the person following me turned around or went a different way. I wasn't rotated for weekends for a little bit, so it didn't escalate. And it didn't happen on weekdays, so I thought I was being paranoid. A couple of months later, however, I stayed late at work on a Friday again. It was around 1:30. I was exhausted and ready for bed. I was sleepily wandering my way home, not really paying attention to my surroundings, when a man from the other side of the road crossed towards me. I was immediately alert, wondering what he wanted. He asked me if I had a light, but I said no, I didn't smoke, and kept walking. He kept going in the opposite direction behind me, but then I heard his feet turn and his footsteps follow behind mine. I just kept walking. Maybe he was going home for a light. I took my next turn, and sure enough, so did he. We were walking alongside a fairly busy main road, well lit, which had cars going next to it every few minutes. But I was about to turn into a much quieter residential area, where the lights were less frequent, and there wouldn't be cars going past unless going into a house. Not wanting to be paranoid, I decided to do a test on whether this guy was just innocently heading home or actually had another purpose for turning around behind me. This was, by the way, when my brain decides to remind me that we are literally walking right past the house where the first incident occurred. I turned into the residential area. The first building on the right is a funeral home, which has 2 carports in the back where they keep the hearses. I scooted down past the house, barely not breaking into a full-on run, and I hid in one of the carports, sticking my head out of the shadow to watch if he'd first follow me into the residential area, and secondly, if he'd just walk straight past the little alley I was hiding in. Sure enough, he turned into the residential area. He walked halfway across the alley opening, then visibly began searching for me in the 2 directions I could have gone. If I'd have kept walking, I would have been very visible. Instead, he gave up after a few seconds of just walking back and forward. He shrugged his shoulders and began walking back from where he came. I went home, shaken by what I'd seen, and asked my bosses if I could possibly not work late Fridays and Saturdays, because I'd been followed recently on 3 occasions. Their response was that it would not be possible to get preferential treatment, and so, if I wanted to be safe, they recommended I take a taxi, which they wouldn't pay for and would cost me an hour's pay for a 2-minute drive, as I lived only a 12-minute walk away from my workplace. Needless to say, I quit shortly after. Last summer, my boyfriend and I went camping in some nature preserve in Pennsylvania. I can't remember the name of it. It was pretty primitive camping. No cell service, and we saw 2 other people there in the entire place. It was huge, so it was pretty empty. My boyfriend immediately said these 2 people seemed off to him right away. I don't know if they had anything to do with what happened that night, but I'll describe them. The first person was a woman. who had her truck parked off the trail and had the hood open. I don't really notice these types of things, but my boyfriend said it looked to him like she was waiting for someone to pull off beside her and offer to help with her truck. Normally my boyfriend is the type to at least offer to call someone, but he said that she skeeved him out. He didn't even want to draw her attention more than was necessary. The next person we saw drove by several times whilst we were setting up. He just kept driving by slowly and looking at us. I didn't even notice though until my boyfriend pointed out that he'd already done it twice before. Whether these two people had anything sinister going on or not, the real story has to do with what woke us up at around 3 a.m. It was incredibly loud and sudden. I couldn't describe it or even compare it to anything, but my boyfriend said that it sounded similar to a chain gun revving up, or someone using a large tool to scrape gravel. My boyfriend jumped up and looked out the little window of the tent. The sound happened again, and again, and it was getting noticeably closer each time. I was about to piss myself, but my boyfriend told me it was probably miles off. I didn't question this because loud noises can be heard from miles away, right? Well, later my boyfriend told me that he said this to me in order not to scare me. It really sounded like it was coming from right down the little dirt road. At one point, he said he suspected it was right in front of our campsite. The only reason he didn't tell me to get out and dart for the car was because he would be afraid it would be someone trying to scare us out of the tent for some dreadful reason. When he whispered, I should have noticed he was whispering and knew something was wrong, since otherwise he would have just spoken normally, right? He would have told me to go back to sleep. However, I couldn't because every little sound I heard outside I thought was someone sneaking up onto the tent. Eventually my boyfriend told me to get out and help him pack up. It was about 20 minutes perhaps after the sound stopped, and he held onto our only weapon, a machete, in front of him. It was a full moon, so we didn't need a light, and while we were packing quickly, I noticed an empty beer can close to our dead campfire. It certainly wasn't there when we went to sleep at around 10 p.m, as neither of us even bought any beer. Thankfully, we got out of there, and the rest of the trip we had a blast, and we either camped in areas well populated by the campers, or got a hotel room. Sometimes, it's just not worth the risk when in the middle of nowhere. When I was a kid, hiking along a coastal national forest area with my friend and his dad, I went alone down an overgrown side trail to pee. I noticed a stench from the main trail that we figured was a dead animal somewhere that was nearby, but it was getting more powerful as I went a short distance down that side trail. I stopped at a tree to do my business and found some trash scattered at the base of it. A cardboard sign leaned against it that read, "Come and find me," with an arrow pointing further down the overgrown trail. At that point, the stench was so powerful that my nose was starting to burn. I couldn't pee, with my mind freaking out, with all the kind of images of what the hell could be further down the trail. So I went back to the main trail and didn't say anything to my friend or his dad about what I had seen until I couldn't hold my pee in anymore, and asked his dad to stop again so that I could pee. When we got back to town, he called it in to the local sheriff. I don't know what they found, if anything, but I can't help but still imagine some suicidal man's corpse, or a bunch of dead animals, a budding serial killer slaughtered and arranged somewhere down the trail. I've had my fair share of creepy people throughout my life. Bucharest is a city where things like this rarely happen. So just take it from me, I had bad luck. First of all, let me just say that I'm not your average scaredy cat dude who legs it when someone stares at them for a long time. I'm also not the kind of guy that would hide under his bed if my house gets broken into. You better believe I'll stomp their asses with no regard for my own safety. Keyboard warrioring aside, there have been a few moments that I've had with total strangers that have been genuinely scarring and absolutely terrifying. I'm going to be talking about the most messed up situation that I've ever been in my life, and I profoundly hope that it never happens again. The incident happened 4 years ago before New Year's Eve. I was 18 at the time and had finished high school in summer with no activity and nothing else to do. So I decided to look for something I could do part-time with my limited skill sets and talents. The only thing I was remotely good at was playing video games and boxing. My mum found out about this casting job in a newspaper article back when she didn't know how to browse the internet, and she called and set up a meeting without really talking to me about it. I decided to just play along, since I was searching for something anyway, and casting in some shows seemed like an awesome choice. I'm 6'1", and I was skinny at the time, so I figured that they would make me wear stuff like a clothing model. Needless to say, my naivety got the best of me, and I didn't realize that things did not work that way at all. I got to the casting studio, and the place was a total wreck. It was in some run-down building at the edge of the city. No windows. The bricks in the walls were cracked, and the withering vegetation was getting a hold of the whole place. It was also strange that there were no people around, but I figured that since this was the city's edge and all, then it should be a normal sight. I realized that there was no front door, so I went down some stairway on the far end of the building, which led me to a rotten wooden door. There was no handle or anything, so I didn't even know if I should try and push or pull it with the tip of my finger somehow. I decided that it must be the wrong place, so I called their number, which my mum provided me with, and somebody answered. It was, well, she said she was a woman, but I thought she was a man at first. See, she had such a low-pitched voice. She was very sweet and patient with me, and told me that this was indeed the building, and that I should go in. I should try to hold the door and push on it a bit, and then pull it towards me slowly, so it wouldn't break the hinges, and not to be afraid when I go inside, because it's going to be pitch black. Apparently there's no electricity in the area, so I just needed to go forward until I felt another door, and that was going to take me to another hallway which was completely lit up, and then take me into their office. Now hold up. What kind of insane dumbass do you think I am to do this? I've watched too many horror movies to know that this is all kinds of wrong. The lady on the other side gave me a brief explanation of why the office was like this. Apparently, this was an apartment complex built in the 60s, but it got really wrecked after the 77 earthquake, which killed quite a lot of people, because some of the pillars on the second floor were really unstable beforehand, so they had to close it, and no one has really done anything with it since. Since the casting company was really low budget, they couldn't afford to have a nice looking office, and to be in a good looking place, or at least a safe one. One thing I found sketchy is that somewhere in this conversation she said, "You're alone, yeah?" I thought this was a bit strange, as if she could see me somehow. Her story seemed legit though. I closed the door, opened the rotting door, and sure enough, darkness. I should point out that when I pulled the door towards me, there was a chair in front of the door, probably to block it from collapsing inwards, as it apparently swung both ways because of its state of decay. I activated my phone flashlight to look around, and it was just really empty. There were a few chairs in a corner, and a dirty white ragged looking tarp on the ground next to them. The door in the front had the same aspect of the rotting wood. I figured that they would at least renovate that one to make it look more appealing. I pushed the door gently, and it opened with a very loud creak. I think I should have pulled it, but this one didn't have handles either. Everything was still dark. I started questioning the system that they use and the fact that they're not professional. The lady told me that the hallway would be lit up, yet it wasn't. With my phone light still on, I scanned the room for clues as to where the office might be. I know how this must seem to you, listener. How did I not pick up on this incredibly sketchy situation? I'm just used to this. In the past, me and my parents didn't have light sources in our backyard. So whenever we needed something from the pantry, which also didn't have a light source, we would be in total darkness. This whole thing was getting on my nerves, so I deactivated my flashlight and decided to call the number again. As soon as I put my phone to my ear, and the light it emitted turned off, I heard a loud creak behind me. The sound of the rotting door I pushed out earlier getting back into place. I jumped at the sound and let out a sharp yell. I instinctively put my phone out, but the light the dial screen was emitting was too weak to see in front of me. "Hello?" I asked in a worried voice, but there was no response. But in a second I could hear the dial tone from my phone, and I hear a Nokia ringtone, the piano one, from the other side of the room from where the door had been closed. I stay silent for a moment, and the ringing stops. I have never been more horrified in my life. I crouched down and started moving along the wall to my left, as quickly and quietly as possible. I hear very faint footsteps coming from my right, but I couldn't tell if they're coming towards me. I formulated a very basic escape plan in an instant. I had a general idea of where the door was, and the footsteps seemed to be directionless. I took 2 coins of 50 bunny out of my pocket and threw them at the corner of the other side of the room, and then booked it. I pushed on the edge of the door at first because I ran too fast and had no idea where the door was, and I pushed against it to get out the room. I tripped because I was expecting no resistance, yet a chair was blocking the other side. I heard scampered footsteps behind me and slight grunts. I get up and run away in the dark room with no regard to what I may hit on the path. I just knew the exit would be right in front of me. Sure enough, I hit another chair on the way, the one that I found blocking the door at the entrance, and it propelled me so hard that I bashed the door and knocked it out of its hinges. I opened my eyes and I was outside, so my first instinct was to scream for help at the top of my lungs. I look in the building and I finally see him. A tall, overweight man, probably around 300 pounds, carrying a cloth in one of his hands. He was wearing a white tank top and jeans or sweatpants. and I wasn't really paying much attention at the time, but the expression on his face was one of pure anger. I scampered around and ran up the stairs as fast as I could, and then turned right into town. I ran for about 3 or 4 minutes at full speed, not stopping for anything, until I finally reached a main street and saw a lot of cars. I was still in a panicked state, so I beelined to the nearest taxi and told him to take me home. I called my mum when I was halfway and told her everything that happened. She felt sick to her stomach and started crying that she put me in a situation where I might have died. Later that day, I filed a report at our nearest police station, and they sent a dispatch there. We were informed that they found traces of a few blunts, which had cannibal saliva and a double-edged razor on the ground. They also found a broken Nokia flip phone in the dirt outside. My parents told the police that if they find anything else, to please contact them. This has left me with some serious issues, as I know I feel very anxious whenever I go to job interviews. I only feel relatively safe if the location is in a very public place and the interview is at rush hour. One man did this to me. By far, the worst New Year's Eve I've ever had. So kids, stay safe, and remember your martial arts training doesn't mean shit when you're scared shitless. I was camping in Lake Tahoe with my family when I was 18. I stepped away from our camp for a few minutes to try and take a picture of this odd-looking pine tree. It had all the branches shaved off clean at one side. I had seen down the trail a couple of minutes away, and I followed the trail, but couldn't find this enormous pine I was sure had been there. I walked back and couldn't find the camp. Mind you, I was still on the trail. I was either walking in one direction or another, and we were camping right by the clearing that was in no way hidden. I walked back and forth for about 20 minutes and couldn't find anything remotely familiar. I had walked maybe a yard in either direction, trying to find the camp or anything that could lead me to it. I even took to yelling to get my dad's attention, but nothing happened. So I figured I'd return to my original starting point and wait until my dad came for me, but I couldn't find that either. It just seemed as if I were walking through invisible portals that sent me off different parts of the trail. After about 10 minutes of following this trail back and forth and ending nowhere, a little bit of panic set in. I noticed that the woods had become stupidly silent, not quiet, but silent and muffled, as if I were wearing earbuds. Then I heard the ocean, not the sound of water, but the actual thunder of big oceanic waves crashing against rocks. Only that sound and nothing more. Finally I panicked, and just booked it through the opposite direction. After a few minutes of running, I found myself in a familiar spot, and then I made my way back to camp. To me, the whole ordeal seemed to take about 30 to 40 minutes tops. My dad actually told me that I had been gone for 3 hours, and that he himself had walked after me and couldn't find me anywhere. I had just moved to Rhode Island and was getting settled when I met this new guy called Joe, and he had asked me out to dinner. We had started hanging out a lot and eventually began dating. After we'd been together for a few weeks, he decided to have his friends Jay and Paul come over for dinner. So they come over and I cooked dinner, and we actually got along really well. So eventually, the night led to us all somehow sitting on the floor of the apartment and talking politics. The night was great. Jay had eye problems, so he can't drive. So later, after Paul had already left, Joe went to bring Jay home. On the ride home, Jay started yelling at Joe and freaking out about how he never gets his way and how Joe always has the great catch and how I was everything he ever wanted in a girl. Whilst I was flattered, the outburst was a little scary. Jay then proceeded to demand that Joe pull over and let him walk home. Joe didn't want to drop a half-blind man off in a town he was unfamiliar with at 1 in the morning, but Jay opened the car door whilst the car was moving and tried to get out. So Joe finally pulled over and let him out. Joe got all the way back to the apartment and told me what happened, and I felt awful knowing that he was wandering around the city, and Jay had already texted Joe telling him to leave him alone. So I drove out to find him, and he was 20 feet away from where Joe had left him, and I made him get in the car and took him home. So the next day, Joe tried talking to Jay about the previous incident, and they only ended up getting into an argument. A few weeks later, Jay called me. No idea how he got my phone number, as Joe said he didn't give it to him in order to apologize to me. The conversation started off fine, but then it got weird. He would go on and tell me how much he needed a girl like me, and how much he liked me, even in the first 5 minutes we'd met. He then proceeds to talk bad about Joe, who he had been friends with for over 25 years. They met in a camp for kids with eye problems, you see. And he would tell me about how all the girls Joe had been with, and how bad he was for me, and how I deserved someone like him instead. I told him how uncomfortable this all was, and we got off the phone. Later that evening, Joe came over and we spoke about the phone call. He was pretty upset over it, which I understood, but I told him I just thought Jay was lonely, so we brushed it off. A few days later, Jay and Joe made up and were no longer fighting, but things were still kind of strained. They went out for lunch, and I got a text from Joe saying to meet him at a restaurant. When I got there, I find out that Joe never texted me, and that Jay had taken his phone and messaged me. It was weird and resulted in another fight. I went home kind of upset. I didn't like to see these two longtime friends fighting, especially saying some of the things they did to each other. Joe was being very defensive about me, and Jay was just being mean. So Joe came over later that night to see how I was, and we watched a movie to relax. He left later that evening, and after about 10 to 15 minutes after he left, I got a phone call from an unknown number. It was Jay, and he said it was an emergency and that he was at the hospital, and that Joe wasn't answering his phone. So I got dressed and got in the car and headed to the hospital. You see, Jay has a form of eye cancer, retinoblastoma, so I thought something might be wrong. On the way there, I called Joe and left him a voicemail telling him what was up. I get to the hospital, and no one with Jay's name was checked in. I called his cell, but there was no answer. So I drove home, and when I got to my house, Jay was on my front steps. I hadn't seen him until I got to the front steps, as I have a very long and dark driveway. I asked him what the hell was going on. I was super scared and nervous at the same time, and he started telling me how much he loved me and wanted me, and that Joe didn't deserve me, and that if I would just be with him, he would be so happy, as would I. He was getting closer and closer to me with every sentence, and I was backing up further and further. It was very scary, and I started to yell at him to stop and leave, or I would call the police, and he wasn't listening. So I felt into my jean pocket for my phone, and I had left it in the car. So I turned and started running for my car, and I could hear him right behind me. I made it to my car and managed to unlock it and get in before he caught up. I was just punching in 911 when Joe pulled up into the driveway behind me. He had Paul with him. I guess they went to the hospital to see Jay. They both got out and went to Jay to calm him down. They finally got him to leave, and Joe was so apologetic, and Paul had no idea what was happening, because he didn't know any of the other details. They went inside to calm me down, and so that Joe could catch up Paul on the story. They both stayed the night there, and Joe and Paul contacted Jay and informed him that if he were ever to come near me again, the police would be contacted, and there would be a restraining order placed on him. So fast forward a few months, it's now New Year's Eve, and the three of us had not seen or heard from Jay, and we were moving on from the whole situation. So Joe is having a New Year's Eve party at his apartment, and we were all having a great time and enjoying the evening. At around 11:30, the doorbell rang and I went to answer. And guess who was at the door? With Joe's ex-girlfriend, Sarah. I lost it a bit and almost slammed the door shut in their face. Joe showed up behind me and was trying to figure out what was going on exactly. Turns out, Jay had been contacting Sarah for the past 3 months, trying to hook her back up with Joe, and he was scaring her immensely, doing to her what he did to me with the phone calls, the harassment, and telling her how much he loved her. Tonight, however, she had enough of his crap and told him to meet her at Joe's house. We told the cops that she didn't want him near her and to contact her for her statement. I felt bad about it, but I left my statement as well, and we all ended up with a restraining order. When I was stationed in North Carolina, we went to do our early yearly tear gas chambers, which is out in the middle of the woods. We did the chamber, walked out, and I go walk to the corner of the hooch to blow a massive snot rocket, because the tear gas clogs you up. I look up, and I see a big pile of shiny crimson and a brown mess. Naturally, I go take a look, and all it is the innards of something large, just sitting there in a very neat pile looking quite fresh. There was no blood, no tracks, no evidence that anything had happened there, other than a huge pile of guts. The area was kind of sandy, so there definitely should have been tracks. Shit was weird. About a week or two later, we went out to the field for some good old motivated infantry training. First day out there, we had a long night patrol to do. My squad sets out, with me bleeding, and not even 15 minutes into it, I stumble into an old foxhole. By stumble, I mean dropped like a sack of rocks thanks to all the gear I had on me. I felt like there were a bunch of branches down there, and I felt a couple of bugs crawl around me. No big deal, I'm used to it at this point. When a couple of my squad mates are helping me out, the fourth one shines his flashlight, and everyone starts to flip shit and smacking the hell out of me. The foxhole was basically a brown recluse breeding ground, and I fell right into it. Yeah, not so used to that. After throwing my camis and gear off and trying to shake them all off me, the guy with the flashlight looks in the foxhole and says, "Holy shit." There must have been about 1 million spiders in there, and the bottom was filled with bones. Lots of bones. Some buddies and I went camping by a lake one night. At about 1:30 a.m, we heard some rustling in the bushes, and just figured it was a rabbit or something. We went over to check it out, and found nothing. At about 1:35 a.m, a huge pickup truck that was lifted and blaring loud music drove by on a dirt road really slowly, shining a huge police-grade spotlight on me and my friends. The truck burnt out and kept driving, So my best friend and I decided to drive up the road to see if we could spot anything unusual about the truck. We get to the main road, and there are probably 7 or 8 cop cars, lights flashing, and 2 or 3 ambulances. We stop to turn around, and I swear, like a damn horror film, a cop pecks on my window with his flashlight out of nowhere, and he asks what we're doing. We told him we were camping, and told him about the truck, and he says, "Well, you boys might want to camp somewhere else. We just had a triple homicide here, and we haven't located the suspect." Friend says, "So should we be scared?" Like a goddamn idiot, and the cop says, and I quote, "Well, I'm not scared, but there are 20 officers here and we all have guns." I said, "Yes sir," and tore off back down the campsite. Best friend called the rest of our buddies and told them to pack up gear and not ask questions, and that we had to get out. We literally threw 2 fully pitched tents in the back of one of our trucks and got the hell out of there. The cops located the killer about 30 minutes later at our campsite. When I was a teenager, I used to go camp out by myself. I had a spot that I liked, that was a few fences from my grandparents' house, out in the middle of nowhere. One of the places I cut through was a pasture full of cattle. Around cattle, especially cattle unfamiliar with me, I try to be very careful not to spook them, but otherwise cows are pretty easy going. This was about a mile from my grandparents' house, and probably about 2 from my destination. The one time I am thinking of, I slipped through the fence to find the cattle already freaked out. They were insanely agitated about something that I wasn't aware of. So, I stayed well clear of them as I went through the pasture. I had a good time camping that night and packed up next morning. As I went back to the pasture, however, there was this ridiculously bad smell. It smelled like a skunk had fought with something in a fertilizer barrel of shit, and the barrel broke apart. It was awful. I tried to look around for the cows to make sure that they were not going to be surprised when I found them. They were just gone. There were some bushes and trees though, so I thought they were just out of sight. I kept walking through the place to go home, and it smelled so bad I set down my stuff at the fence line and decided to investigate. Well, I found the cows. All of them were shot and ripped apart. Someone had carefully shot them in the head with a bolt gun and eviscerated all of them. They had also dug a shallow ravine and piled the bodies in. It was horrible. I hightailed it out of there to grab my gear, and my stuff was gone. As in, I set it right down here on this rock, and it was within eyeshot. A quick glance showed me that there was not anything ripped or fallen out. I think Usain Bolt would have not been able to catch me on my way home. I never heard anything else about those cows, and never went back to the old camp spot again. First off, you need to know that I live in a poor Eastern European country. In a big city, but in a bad neighborhood. At least, that's what I've been told. I've never actually encountered any creepy individuals that would want to do any harm. Just your usual vandals and troublemakers. Never anyone serious. I am also still a teenager and live with my parents. But growing up in this environment, I consider myself to be quite street smart. At around 3 p.m, my dad left for table tennis practice, and I knew that he would be back around 8. And coincidentally, my older brother and mother left to help out one of my friends clean up their place after the New Year's Eve party. I should have probably come along, but honestly, I felt quite sick and hungover after yesterday's festivities. That was probably the luckiest I've ever been. So all of my family left except me. Naturally, I've been home alone before, so that doesn't really make me uneasy at all. So the evening goes on like any other. I'm re-watching some episode of Skins when suddenly I feel the urge to snack. Just behind my apartment complex there is a very well-known supermarket, which I can always rely on whenever I'm in the deep need of a snack. It's about a 5-minute walk, so I put on my coat and some flip-flops and I'm out. It's freezing balls outside, and I can see the bright lights of the supermarket in the distance, but something was off. In front of the automatic doors, there was a small robust figure. As I get closer, I could distinguish its face. It was a face of a man who I'd seen before. I remember him countless times roaming around our block of flats, but never actually thought anything of him. He was dressed poorly and was staying in front of the doors as if he were guarding them. I asked if the supermarket was still open, and he pointed to a paper which was clipped to the schedule. It said it closed at 6 PM because of the holiday season, and it was 6:20. I let out a sigh and wanted to turn around and go home, but he told me in an alarmed voice that there was a very close boutique next to the supermarket, and I told him that I didn't need anything important and that I would be back tomorrow. But he kept insisting that it was only a 2-minute walk from there, and while staring at me in a weird manner. That was the first red flag, but I found a logical explanation in my mind, thinking that maybe the man was just very eager to help me. Maybe so that I would give him some money. That sort of made sense, but I was still alert. So I walked to the boutique and took whatever I could find and wished the shop owner a happy new year and left in a hurry. As time passed, I was getting more and more nervous for some reason. I guess my gut was just telling me that something was off. What made me really switch was the fact that I had been gone for about 5 minutes, and just as I was passing the supermarket, the guy who was usually roaming the area was nowhere to be seen. At that point, I started jogging towards my apartment, all the while trying to calm myself and imagining plausible explanations as to why the guy was not there anymore. I get to the bottom of the stairs of the front door, and in the distance, I notice a tall dark figure entering the elevator, and at the same time, almost as if it were planned, the automatic lights switched off. I desperately ran towards the interphone, and clumsily got my keys out to open the door. As I ran to the elevator, it was still running. I live on the 7th floor, and I could see it go all the way up when it stopped at the 5th. I let out a big sigh of relief, but was still skeptical, so I took the stairs. As I was walking up the stairs almost laughing, I noticed that above me, the light on the 6th floor was turned on, so that was a bit strange, and I kept on walking. And then the light on the 7th floor was on. I stopped, looked above, and hoped that whoever it was would go to the 8th. A minute passed, which felt like an hour, and the light on the 7th floor was still on. So I decided to take some action, and I ran all the way up to my floor and saw something that would almost make me pass out. The tall dark figure was kneeling on my doorknob, trying to, what I presume was lockpick my door. In these kind of situations I rarely get angry. I just want whatever was going on to stop. So from afar I shout a very weak, "Hey!" and the guy in an instant turns around and stands up. I see him for a split second and he looks terrified. Long black trench coat, a hat and leather gloves. He smiles at me and reveals his yellow unkept teeth. He smiles. Do you know how stomach churning that feels when you stumble upon something like that, and the person just smiles at you? The fear was amplified tenfold. I was shitting my pants, and to my surprise, the man took off running. Before he reached the stairs, he mumbled a sorry and got away. I was still in shock. I couldn't follow him or call the police, or even move for that matter. I easily got into the house of my apartment and noticed that a pin was still stuck in there. Yep, he was definitely trying to get into my house. Who knows what he wanted to do? My parents wouldn't be back for a few more hours, and I wasn't sure if I should tell them or the cops. Thinking in retrospect, I think this tall man and the man in front of the supermarket may have conducted a plan. It would have been all too convenient for him to catch me off guard like that. Either way, it's a scary thought. One thing is for certain though, I will be keeping a bat in my room from now on. So much for New Year's resolutions. August 18th, 2016. I started a trip on the Allagash waterway with my Boy Scout troop. We are located in Hampton, Maine, which is a fair distance south of the waterway. We started our trip in a small brook that led into Eagle Lake. It was my first time on the Allagash, and being the only rookie, I was placed with the most strong and experienced paddler, Connor. Our canoe was almost always in the middle of a group, which meant we had to keep good pace, and my arms were getting tired quickly. In the woods on the bank of Eagle Lake sat 2 steam engines, the ghost trains of Allagash. The real story behind it had nothing to do with ghosts. The Allagash was a popular waterway used for logging, and after the logging stopped, the 2 locomotives were left to rust and break down. It was a really neat experience to see those trains, even after their glory days. For nearly an hour, we climbed on those trains, a little wary of the rust and weak points where the train had been eroded away, and soon enough, we proceeded to make our way across the lake. After paddling for another long while, we decided to line up our boats and motor across the rest of the lake. Our canoes formed a giant fiberglass snake that travelled slowly but easily. I even began to doze off, only to be awoken by a sudden jolt. The boat in front had stopped, causing us to crash up against it. The scout in the stern seat turned, "Watch it." He shook his paddle above his head, splashing me with the grimy lake water. We all resumed paddling, and not long after we reached our first campsite. I set up my tent that I was sharing with my friend Aaron, and, without even waiting until dinner, I fell asleep. The next morning came early. It was 5:30, and I was up packing away the tent. Aaron, after arguing with me, was now sleeping in the wet grass. I skipped breakfast and immediately went to packing my canoe for the trip ahead. The day was normal. We just paddled along until we reached the Chase Rapids, where we unloaded our gear into a trailer and then rode down the rapids in our considerably lighter canoes. We then stopped for lunch and continued down the river towards our next campsite. But that night got weird. We all sat on the banks, watching and shooting stars whizzing through the sky. The lack of light pollution allowed the night to show its true colours. Mixtures of purples and pinks and blues blanketed the sky, with millions of stars piercing through it. At near 10 o'clock, everyone retired to their bedrooms, and snoring commenced. I stepped outside my tent, debating whether I should risk waking Aaron and facing his wrath, or just joining someone else's tent. I turned, looking for a tent that would be big enough for 3, when I noticed something. There was a star that appeared to be moving, not fast like a shooting star, but slowly and growing in size. I stood in shock as the star stopped, hovering almost directly above me. I reached up, expecting my hand to go through it, like a beam of light, but the star was solid and ice cold, as if I had just rolled out of a freezer. I could now see it was more of an oval shape glowing white, A large beam of light surrounded me, and I felt a strange tingling sensation in the back of my neck. I felt myself being lifted from the muddy ground, and I could feel my body being absorbed into the oval like a water in a sponge. I found myself in a dark room, and a thick mist filled my nostrils and mouth. It stung my eyes and lungs, and my entire body went numb quite quickly, and I blacked out. I awoke in a room that was completely white. It was entirely well lit, but I couldn't identify a light source. My ears were ringing, and my eyes were straining painfully. I was laying on a slab made of cold metal, and I was staring at the ceiling. I was paralyzed and cold. The ringing in my ears got worse and worse until it was nearly unbearable. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw something that haunts me to this day. Sliding slowly towards me was a hideous creature. It was completely brown with a large head. 2 large black eyes were bulging from its face. It had 2 pinhole nostrils, and beneath them, multiple folds of skin that may have been covered by some kind of mouth. The monstrosity had an arm protruding straight from its chest region. At the end of the arm was a large hand that included 4 fingers. When compared to a human hand, I would say it had 2 thumbs and 2 pointy fingers. The fingers were pointed straight out. I later found out that they bent into a knuckle on one hand. It had 4 long, thin legs that dragged behind it, and it moved towards me. As it approached me, the ringing got progressively worse. As it slowed and leaned over me, I saw that in its hand, it held a long needle-like tool. The creature put the needle in my mouth, and that's when I lost all consciousness. When I awoke, I was laying in about a foot of water, in the shallows of the lake, and I couldn't remember a thing. We paddled all day as if nothing had happened, and it wasn't until that night the memory came back. One of the leaders told me a story about aliens, and then everything became clear. I don't have any intention of going back into the woods ever again. In 2008, I was in 9th grade, and Facebook was really blowing up. Me and my friends were all over Facebook, as most kids were. And one day, I got a friend request out of the blue. The account had an intentionally ugly profile photo, taken straight from the first page of a Google search. The profile was almost empty except for a few crude jokes and statuses, but it had over 500 friends, with a lot of mutual ones with me. I accepted it, because I accepted everyone back then, and forgot about it. It was about a week later that I got a single message from the account saying, "Hi." I imagine I replied something along the lines of, "Hello," and didn't get a reply again, and I forgot about it until I got another message. This time it said, "How was bowling?" My friends and I had been bowling the night before, but anyone who had me on Facebook could see that. After that message, all of my friends got a friend request from this account and most of them accepted. I got more messages that were all creepy but explainable. They'd be like, "I like your shirt," straight after I posted a picture of myself. None of this bothered me, and I just laughed it off because it was all information I had chosen to share on the internet. That was until I started to get messages like, "When's your mum back? What did you get from the shop?" After I'd been out, I assumed it was one of my neighbours watching me, until my friends told me that they were all getting similar messages, and that they were getting worse. They started to get worse for me as well. They included photos of my parents' car parked outside restaurants and shops, and one close-up of the house number at my door. My friends got stuff like photos taken of family members' profiles, and Google Earth screenshots of their houses, but nothing as bad as what I was getting. The creepiest thing I got was a photo of me outside of my school. It was clearly taken from the driver's seat of a car because you could see the passenger door. Neither me or my friends ever told my parents about this. I guess we thought we were old enough to handle it ourselves. Around this time, I got a BlackBerry for my birthday, and at the same day, I got a text from a 5-digit number saying stuff like, "Guess who?" and "New phone?" They were using one of the old websites to text for free. They continued for about 3 weeks, and then I told my mum I was getting prank calls and she got me a new SIM, and they stopped for a while. This is when it started getting a lot weirder. So I started hanging around with this kid who I knew from school, and he'd been to my house a few times with other people, but we'd never just hang out, the two of us. We would get the train into the city and just explore and usually end up in the park that's part of a shopping complex. We met with this group of people our age a few times, and they were in that park regularly. I really hit it off with a girl named Beth, who was part of that group, and we talked for hours. I asked her to add me on Facebook, and we searched my name on her phone, and when she found me, her face dropped. We only had one mutual friend. Guess who? She told me she'd been getting really weird messages about her and her friends for a few weeks around the time we met. For a few minutes, she was convinced it was me, and started getting mad until me and my friend showed her the messages we were getting. We kind of bonded over it, and she texted me and called me whenever she got a message, and eventually we got pretty close and sort of went on a date. We went to Nando's and walked in a park on the outskirts of the city. Really nice in the summer. Then we went to my house and hung out for the rest of the evening. We lost track of time and it was around 11 PM, and my mum didn't want her walking to the train station at this time, and wasn't sure she'd even make the last train, so she offered to drive her home. We all got into the car and got to the toll tunnel that took us into the city. My mum said she was sure the car behind us had been following us for the past 2 miles, and this kind of freaked me out, but I didn't say anything. We lost the car in the tunnel, got to the city, and made sure Beth got home safely, and drove back through the tunnel. We stopped at a McDonald's a stone throws away from the tunnel, so that my mum could get a coffee, and I think I got a McFlurry. And we were pulling out of the car park and I saw the car behind us, and I was 100% sure it was the same one from earlier. My mum didn't notice, but it definitely followed us from McDonald's all the way to our neighbourhood, then turned up a different street right before we turned onto ours, but I didn't say anything. It had been a long day, and I went to sleep straight away. The next day, I woke up to about 15 messages saying some really messed up stuff. They were quite malevolent, but they weren't threats. Hope you had a good time, dickhead. You shouldn't be doing what you were doing. Did you screw her? These were the kind of messages that were sent. Bear in mind I'm around 14 at the time. I didn't reply to any, and I didn't tell Beth because I really liked her, and I didn't want to scare her away by it. She didn't say if she'd gotten any of the messages,